now with Richard. I want to say Hanania, but I also want
Yeah,
to
that's
say
good.
Hanania. I don't know if you have a preference.
First one is better.
Okay, Hanania it is. And we're just throwing this thing together. I think we're both spontaneous people here. So I asked him if he wanted to do a Socratic dialogue or pre-prepared questions, and he said basically surprise me. So we're going to do a game show today. It's called High Human Capital or Low Human Capital. And I'm going to ask Richard a series of questions, and he's going to have to tell me, is it high human capital or is it low human capital? First question here is, is getting obsessed with an obscure military conflict and running counterfactuals of how it could have gone different, is this high human capital or low human capital?
So I think I have a mailbag that I'm going to write soon. I'm going to answer the questions, and I realized during one of the people asked about whether Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were high human capital, and I realized that and they brought up some things about IQ, whether they're smart, and I realized that I need to actually flesh out the concept of high human capital, because people just think it's basically IQ, and it's actually a lot more than that. So being obsessed with historical military battles, I'd say that's medium human capital. It doesn't tend to be the kind of thing you get into if you want to change the world. I think idealism is part of high human capital. It shows higher human capital than just being in something not abstract at all, just something technical and tangible and for your own interest. So it's medium.
Fair enough. All right. Next question, and this is a kind of a three-parter. Which is the highest human capital? Trying to colonize Mars, trying to colonize the oceans, or trying to colonize very cold regions like Canada, Siberia, and Antarctica?
I'd say the last one, because that's probably the one people talk about the least. I think it's on the cutting edge, and I think it's actually a smart thing to do. It's sort of weird, the space travel stuff, when there's so much of Earth that we can't live on. And while, by the way, population in the advanced countries is shrinking, so like, where are we going to get the people to colonize? We have a lot of space and we have less people, and now we're like, oh, we're going to go colonize Mars. Like, I don't think we're even close to that. So yeah, I like the idea of forming colonies in the Arctic. I think that'd be pretty cool.
100%
Which is probably
agree.
not possible. I don't know if the Arctic is possible, but whatever, close to the Arctic in
Yeah,
northern
well, I
Canada or
mean,
whatever.
so this is a really interesting topic because there are treaties that prohibit us drilling for oil and coal in the Antarctic, which is actually a continent. Like, there used to be dinosaurs and plants, and so there's actually hydrocarbons, and we could obtain that stuff, but there's treaties prohibiting it. So I totally agree with you. You definitely got that question right.
Yeah, I love the penguins, though. I don't want to screw up anything. The penguins, the March of the Penguins. I saw that they're just fascinating little creatures. I don't want to screw with them. I hope we get energy from elsewhere.
We're going to genetically modify the penguins to live in the Caribbean. So they're going to be totally
Some do
fine.
live in the Caribbean, I think. No, not the Caribbean, not that far up, but some of them do live in a little bit warmer climates. Yeah, I'm a big penguin guy.
We're gonna genetically engineer the cutest penguins just for you. They're gonna be household pets. It's gonna be beautiful. So don't you worry about the penguins.
There's a show called Penguin Town on Netflix. Basically, there's like these penguins that go to this town in South Africa, and they're in an urban environment. It's like a resort town, and they go to they live in like people's backyards, and they live in like parking lots, and it follows them like a sort of reality show. So it's very fascinating.
Interesting. There's actually a town in Arizona, sort of in the northeast border with California, and they have just wild donkeys roaming around the town, and people feed them. But it's 110 degrees there. Like, it's really hot. You don't really want to go there if you don't want to die, basically. But the wild donkeys, apparently, they love it. They run around the town. So yeah, we're gonna have to figure out the cute animals question before we start colonizing Antarctica, but I think we can come to a compromise. I think we can figure that out. Next question here is prison abolitionism. Abolishing prisons, is this high human capital or low human capital?
I have to say it is high human capital. High human capital is not always things I like or things that I think are wise. High human capital things tend to be things that smart people believe and idealistic people believe. So, in that sense, yeah, when you're into abolishing something, that usually qualifies.
So you disagree with it, but what if in the course of abolishing prisons, we exiled people to either parts of this country that were segregated from the rest of society or even to other countries so that they couldn't be recidivist and commit their crimes again?
So, would that be a good policy you're asking?
Yeah, would you be interested in?
Yeah, I'm for getting rid of people who are, I think if you're bad enough to be in prison, I mean, if you're in and out of prison your whole life, yeah, I mean, we should be done with you. I don't care what exactly is done to them, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think we have to be, giving them food and health care for the rest of their lives. So yeah, I'd be open to that.
I guess to flesh that out a little bit more, I think that the problem with criminals is their recidivism. I think it's that generally they commit crimes again. And so you do want to separate them from non criminals because it's not fair to victimize innocent people. But I think that I don't have any desire for vengeance or justice or revenge against people who commit crimes on a moral level. I think they should be allowed to be free to live their lives. If you want to go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo and start a small business and live a new life over there, or even again in a part of America that we kind of segregate off, I think that's perfect. I wish them the best. I don't think we should try to put people in cages and ruin their lives because they made a mistake. I just don't think we should release them into the public and let them do it again. That would be my argument.
Yeah, I'm more into vengeance. I mean, I think that there's a sort of balance in the universe. I think when something happens to you, you want to see the person suffer to a certain extent. I think that's a healthy instinct. So I don't share this idea that, oh, you should just let them. This is a pure utilitarian argument. I don't agree with it. I think there's something just desserts. I think indulging in those intuitions a little bit is okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stick with the high human capital on this one. We'll agree to disagree. And I want to ask you a related question, which is about psychology. So I believe you're an atheist. You're a secular materialist, empiricist, but psychology is one of these fields that has a lot of different parts. You got Freud, you got Jung, you got CBT, you've got neuro-linguistic programming. Do you think that all psychology is bunk and a refashioning of religion, or do you think there are fields of psychology that you're sympathetic to? And again, not psychometrics, but like therapeutic applications. Is there anything that you think is high human capital?
Yeah, well, I mean, psychometrics, you're right. Also, personality, the study of personality, I think, is real. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting empirical findings. Cognitive behavioral therapy, people say it works. I mean, it is, the idea that you should be self-reflective. Scott Alexander had a good piece on this. I forget what it's called, but he said basically everyone complains all the time about therapy culture, but like, there are cultures where people have zero introspection about themselves. And we're so far beyond that. We're into like this thing where like we're just navel gazing all the time, at least upper class people. Lower class people, not so much. But upper class, sort of elite college educated people, they, are taught to talk about their feelings from a very young age. You watch like, a sitcom these days or like any of these shows on like networks. I mean, everyone has a psychiatrist, everyone has issues, everyone is dealing with something. And so, that's going too far. And Abigail Schreier's book talks about how this is filtered down to the schools. So yeah, I think we've OD'd on therapy culture, but there's a lot of people in a lot of places in the world where there is not enough reflection. And, I think there's diminishing returns to reflection. You should be reflecting a little bit on your life if you haven't at all, but you can get absorbed in it, and that's not good either.
What do you think about this term mental illness? Because when I hear that, it always like a physical illness generally is something that we expect can be cured. Like if you have COVID, you could theoretically get some medication for that. But mental illness, is that an accurate term or is that misleading? Should we instead call it like a personality defect or something that like this is an inherent bias of this person? You're never going to cure it. You can manage it, but it's not like a physical illness where it's just going to go away.
Well, I don't know if physical illness, if you say physical illness, that necessarily means that it's curable. Some people have chronic illnesses or illnesses that are fatal or illnesses that don't go away. I think that, yeah, the term mental illness I'm not a fan of because it suggests that these things are more immutable than they actually are. And you sort of create self-fulfilling prophecies because an illness is usually something you can't control. You can't control if you have, cancer or AIDS or something. If you have it, you have it, right? And so a lot of people, when they invoke the concept of mental illness, they'll say, drug abuse is an illness. I really hate that. I saw some activists saying, we don't judge people for having cancer. We shouldn't judge them for being addicted to drugs. And I think that's just a disaster. The difference is you put a gun to someone's head who has cancer, you can't stop them from having cancer. You put a gun to someone's head who is a drug addict and say, don't take the drugs, they won't take the drugs, right? We have a choice in our society over how we deal with these things, the incentives we create. And, it's a complex sort of process that determines whether a person becomes addicted to drugs or engaged in some kind of other antisocial behavior. But we do have control over it, and we can shape people's incentives in a positive direction. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the mental illness framing for those and similar reasons.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the sympathy culture around mental illness is driven by profit motives. That if you are a therapist, you notice that if you make your clients comfortable, they want to come back and spend more money on you via their insurance companies or whatever. So I think if you took a harsher approach like tough love and held a gun to their head metaphorically and said, stop it, stop being mentally ill, I think they just wouldn't go back to those specific therapists. And so those therapists become more successful, they become more wealthy, they basically form an unofficial therapist lobby, and they influence how we think about it in the broader culture. So that would sort of be my explanation for why that's occurring. Next question here is high human capital or low human capital, the Ray Peat diet. You've written a little bit about diet and weight loss. Is this a high human capital diet?
So I don't. I looked into the repeat diet once, but I don't remember. Can you just remind me what it means?
Oh gosh, can you really just sum it up? I mean, but I think that the basic way I would describe it is that they're pro meat and fruit and sugar, and they are anti seed oils and they're anti vegetables, and they're really interested in progesterone, I think, and increasing that as much as possible, which I don't really understand what that hormone
For
does.
fruit and against vegetables. Seems like just that's what you want to eat, right? You want to eat sweet things and meat. No,
Yeah.
I think it's mostly low human capital. See, diets are, everyone has a diet, so you can't say it's like high. Everyone has ideas about dieting. I think this anti-seed oil stuff, I haven't looked into the science because of the people who promote it. I assume it's wrong. I mean, it's just like the most illogical people in the world who are stupid on other things. Like I just assume that it's wrong, but I won't judge it on that basis alone. But I will say that that's the kind of people it's associated with. So that's sort of conspiratorial. Don't trust the man, the Gribble voters that I talk about. Yeah, that's sort of the heart of low human capital.
There's going to be a lot of Hanania heads who are very depressed with that answer, but we
Seed oil.
are.
I don't know. Have you looked into seed oils? I don't know. I hear so much about it. It's just always they're always so stupid. The people who are talking about, like Eva Vanderbuck or whatever her name is, that very beautiful girl from the Netherlands who's just insane, right? Like people like that are the ones who talk about seed oils.
Or RFK, yeah, the Gribble voters, yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, this is an area where I have to side with low human capital.
Okay, I'm open to them being wrong. I mean, if
Yeah,
you could send me something on it, I'll look into it.
yeah. I mean, well, hey, it's not really something that's needed if you're already in shape, but we do have an obesity crisis in this country, so
It would be good to know. It would be good to know for
yeah.
for.
I have a question for you, and this isn't necessarily fitting into the game show theme, but as far as utilitarianism, you mentioned this kind of dark area you get into when you start considering animal rights, because then you start
Yeah.
sort of fantasizing about the end of humanity to save the animals and so on.
I don't. That sounds like I'm fantasizing about the end of humanity. Not like that, but yeah, I start to consider whether those are the implications.
Right. So I kind of wanted to explore that maybe in a way that is counterfactual and imaginary, which is that is there a point, or what would be the point? Can you imagine a point where you could go back far enough in history, in our evolutionary history, 100,000 years ago, 200,000, a million years ago, 10 million years ago, and at what point do utilitarian arguments about preserving humanity on the basis that we're humans, we're better than non-humans, we should preserve human life, at what point do those would you go all the way back to the rat that survived the asteroid hitting the dinosaurs and work to go in a time machine with guns and trucks and stuff and defend that rat against predators or something? Or would you just be like, I don't know, it's a rat. Theoretically, it could evolve into a human in millions of years, but what do I care?
So I know the outcome. I know the rat or the small mammal is going to evolve into humanity and everything that happened.
Well, I would say you have imperfect information in that you can go back and you can observe different species. You see there's fish, you see there's rats, you see these different things going on, and you're like, well, the rats have a higher probability of evolving into humans than the fish. So how much effort are you going to put into, staking out an encampment and setting traps for predators and things like that, and treat them like your family in this kind of utilitarian way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, it's hard to get over the idea that you don't have that information. I mean, if you're, you can be an oracle, you can give me a crystal ball and I can see what's going to happen. I don't think I can do that and from first principles, because maybe I'm making it weaker by defending it against predators and so forth, right? It needs that evolutionary pressure. If I know they're going to turn into humans, I don't want to touch anything because that's the way that things unfolded. But the idea that I could, I would help it along if I knew for sure that could work, right? I'd be like, oh yeah, so, go away for 10 million years and something cool will happen. Sure. I mean, I think that's the spirit of the spirit in which your question is asked. In that case, yes, but in practicality, if I had this time machine, no.
Okay, and then the reverse is to look forward to humanity in thousands or maybe even millions of years, and we've shifted and we've changed so much genetically that we're no longer the same species. You wouldn't be able to breed with these non-humans. They would technically be descended from humans. There would be a continuation in evolutionary terms, but they would not be humans, and they would be very different from us. Would you, at that point, assess your loyalty to your utilitarian loyalty to this group? Would that have to do more with their genetic similarity, or would you be looking more at personality traits? If they had really big breasts, would you be more sympathetic to them and helping them out? What would be the determining factors at that point?
Yeah, if they're, it's not about genetic distance. If they're recognizable in some way, I don't think I'd like a kind of a mammalian ant that had no individuality and just was sort of they sort of each person accepted their role. There are some human societies that are closer to this kind of way of living. Yeah, it would be sort of beauty, intelligence, morality. Whether they have concepts we care about like heroism, and love, and courage. If they were like humans in every way and they were not genetically similar, but they were superior to you, they were just like us, but better looking and smarter and more moral, then I'd be loyal to them. I mean, I'd support them. My support for human is not genetic closeness. That's not the point. The point is, the higher ideals.
I agree with you, and I guess that's why I do consider animal rights, because I think there are, as you mentioned, there are people. Obviously, humans are very capable; they're very intelligent compared to other animals. But that capacity allows them to basically have negative values. So I don't look at a random human and say each human has this randomly assigned value of 1, and each animal has a randomly assigned value of 0. I say actually some people are positive 10, some people are negative 10. and animals are basically like a 0.5 or something. So that's kind of how
Yeah.
I would calculate that.
Yeah. You call yourself a leftist, and this is what you believe? You believe some humans have negative value? That's not a very leftist view.
I think Stalin would agree with me, but
Well, Stalin, okay. With Stalin, yeah, okay, fine. If
yeah.
you're a Stalinist,
Well, I mean,
then
the French
you get it.
Revolution, and I have a weird sort of leftism where I think Julius Caesar was a leftist. Like, I don't think that my concept of the left is not restricted to like the last 100 years or 200 years or
Mm.
something. I think left versus right is a very deep human divide that goes
So
back.
Napoleon would be your guy, right?
Yeah, yeah, Napoleon, and to an extent the French revolutionaries, and yeah, I think that is more the spirit of what I'm going for. Um, but I want to ask you a serious question that maybe could be a little bit tricky, which is you
Mm.
talk a lot about the impact of regulation on the economy. And I basically agree that obviously big, large bureaucracies are inefficient. If you make them bigger, you increase inefficiency. But that is not the biggest issue worrying me on the economy. And I
Mm.
want to ask you how much of variability or how big of a threat do you think there is to our dollar system, to the Bretton Woods system? Do you think that countries like our geopolitical enemies, China, Iran, Russia, do you think that they have a chance through things like BRICS to form these alternative currencies, whether that's crypto, whether that's a gold-backed currency, commodity-backed currency? Do you think that's a significant threat to our economy if they forge an alternative to the dollar?
So the status of the dollar as a reserve currency, a lot of people think it's sort of an arbitrary thing. It's not. It reflects the fact that a lot of people trust the U.S. dollar more than they trust other kinds of currency. And so the question is, I mean, it's basically a way of asking, do you think the U.S. is in decline geopolitically, or do people even? It doesn't even have to be decline geopolitically. Do people distrust our system? And I don't think the Chinese or the Russians have sort of their stock has improved in the last 3-4 years. I think that zero COVID, the mistake that China made there, they reversed it, but it's always going to be in the back of everyone's mind. I mean, the capital that's fleeing out of China, they know this is a crazy government that at some point can flip the switch and do something like this again. So no, Chinese, the Russians, of course, this is a basket case. I mean, Prigozhin almost just walked to Moscow and took over. Like the country just it was very close to just sort of breaking apart. I mean, it's sort of crazy what happened there. So no, I don't think there are alternatives. Whether it'll be like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, the strength seems to be in these third world countries where like people are worried about inflation. So apparently, like Bitcoin is like in Argentina and Venezuela and places like that. It has a lot of uses. And whether it has uses as like a kind of reserve currency of the world, like China has a bunch of Bitcoins or America has a bunch of Bitcoins, I can't see it. I mean, these things are ultimately backed up by power, and the idea that you're going to put your faith in this sort of, it's essentially a meme. It's essentially a meme, Bitcoin, right? It's like it's high in value because people think it's high in value. The U.S. government could at some point say, could ban it, and you could still use it, but it's going to be hard and it's going to create all kinds of risks. So yeah, I mean, if something doesn't have the backing of any government in the world, it could have some uses, but like something like a reserve currency, I don't see that.
Yeah, I guess the softer version of this question is that countries like India have been trading with Russia in the ruble. This isn't the first time we've heard about the possibility of this. People had murmurs that Muammar Gaddafi was going to trade in the euro or something, or Saddam Hussein. And I think those, whether or not they are genuine threats, I think there is a case to be made that somebody, especially trading resources like oil, when you're trading oil in something other than the American dollar, I think that does have the potential to devalue our currency, because I think that's besides the fact that people trust us and we have this big military and stuff. The fact that it is tied to oil, I think, is also a large part of its value. I mean, we don't have a gold-backed currency, but in a certain sense, we do have an oil-backed currency, just because all of the oil-selling countries tend to sell it in American dollars, or they did up until recently, and now they seem to be shifting away from that. So I guess my concern is that if we continue to move in that direction, we're going to lose kind of one of the three legs of the stool, which is trust, military, and oil. We're going to lose that, and our currency is going to devalue over time. It's going to have huge economic effects. Do you think that's?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, but I don't know if economists say that the US reserve currency is a huge factor in American living standards. I think a lot of them think it's more a reflection of trust in the American system. It matters a little bit because there's an artificially high demand for dollars. But I think this stuff tends to be overblown. I'm open to being wrong on this, but I haven't read any analysis that says, oh, this is what's propping up US living standards. A lot of people seem to believe that, but I haven't seen the evidence for it.
Yeah, you talked a lot with Bentham about existential risks, and I agree with you that AI and nuclear war and PEPFAR and these kind of like, oh, millions of people could die if X, Y, and Z, and there's a 10% chance or there's a 1 in 10,000% chance. I'm really not so much worried about that as I am about, okay, we have this economic structure. It's tied into our geopolitics. It's tied into our relations with these other countries. And if we have like MAGA Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, and they're saying, who cares about Ukraine? Who cares about these foreign wars? You know, we should get out of NATO. We should, close all of our military bases, bring the troops home, and put them on the Mexican border. I think there is, they obviously aren't the dominant voices in Congress, but I think you tolerate that domestically, and then you tolerate what India is doing with Russia, and just kind of letting people squeak in under the door and get more and more and more. You give them an inch, they take a mile. That's kind of my not an existential fear, but from the perspective of like severe economic recession, that's kind of what I'm on the lookout for. But if you don't,
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, it's a reasonable thing to be concerned about. The fact that the MAGAs are such fundamentally unserious people, and the fact that they are sort of just crazy and don't have a kind of like higher purpose. The fact that they see Ukraine from the perspective of, the trannies, support Ukraine and like America that we don't like. And that's like how I think a Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene actually thinks about Ukraine. I mean, just fundamentally unserious. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Trump is like the person who is sort of the king of these people and also emboldens them and gives them a major role to play in our politics. And so, yeah, it's a legitimate concern. I mean, I do think that there is a kind of weakness in the Biden administration that does sort of cause chaos. I think the not standing with Israel, I think is disgraceful. I think that's bad for for maintaining alliances. If the U.S. has a reputation for not being solidly behind the countries it's allied with, that's potentially a problem. I think that a lot of other things like the Obama administration. I mean, there was a coup to try to get rid of the leftist government in Honduras. I think we should have probably supported that. I mean, I think that these Latin American leftists do not deserve sort of the privilege of sovereignty. I mean, I think that these they have disastrous ideas. They've had disastrous consequences for their countries. I mean, there was a report in the New York Times Magazine recently about Prospera, about how the right-wing government wanted to let them build this, the city, this charter city that lived under its own rules, and like the left-wing government's trying to take it. The city's just sitting there and it's not doing anything wrong. These people just can't stand the thought of somebody coming into their country and building something. I mean, these are the worst people, right? And so, like, these people under a Trump administration will have a lot less sort of leeway. They'll have a lot less ability to shape, their countries in a negative direction. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's like a lot of the American role in the world is like, for example, like the Houthis, I don't think they do this under Trump. I think he bombs the hell out of them. I mean, the Biden administration's worried about civilian casualties. These, ragtag, group of terrorists could just sort of close down or significantly limit the traffic going through one of the major causeways of the world. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on here. The broader thing I worry about with Trump and with MAGAs is like, it's not just even what they're going to do in foreign policy. It's the deterioration at home. It's like we don't have norms of like, you don't mess with the Federal Reserve. Like you don't just, commit crimes and then pardon people who commit the crimes, where we just become a less functional more corrupt country. And that's Trump. That's Republicans. I mean, it's really. I mean, it's the human capital problem is getting worse on the right, and I think it's going to now. When Trump goes away, he's like sort of a bulwark against like RFK, like taking over the Republican Party or something. I mean, I don't think it's that crazy anymore. But at the same time, he's like so Trump is so charismatic, it's so much power that like nobody's going to be able to replace him. So you're going to get more normal politics after Trump. And TG, I don't think it's going to become like the Republican nominee for president or anything like that. And so yeah, it's a complicated issue. I agree with you on the state of MAGAs and sort of the threat they pose.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question, right? Because you're voting for Trump, but you're allowing for a lot of criticism for him. I'm maybe going to do the opposite. I'm going to defend some of the things Trump has done. For example, you guys talked about Bentham, and you talked about the tariffs as being a negative thing. And yeah, maybe a flat tariff on all countries everywhere ever could be a bad thing, especially if we want to form, like with Mexico. I think we should form closer ties with Mexico. But specifically with China, which was the thrust of that trade war, you said, oh, it lowered GDP by 1%. Well, again, from my perspective, a geopolitical enemy like China threatens the economy through the fact that we want to keep the dollar strong, and that involves being the world's policeman. And if you are not critical of China and you don't put any pressure on China at all and show them who's boss, that threatens our global economy through a sort of convoluted way. Maybe it's a series of different steps. It's a long causality, but I think actually having a trade war with China is justified from that view of authority and trust and our military and projecting strength. So I actually give you that one on Trump, that I think he was strong on China. And I also would applaud Joe Biden in the fact that he did not take away those tariffs. He was strong on those tariffs. He was strong against China. So I think China is not like, oh, well, they just have a different system. We'll just let them do what they want to do, and we'll trade with them, and everything will be happy, and we can just be rich together. I think China is a geopolitical threat, and it threatens the global economy on a macro level, because this is kind of I know that the libertarian idea is that we both trade and we're both better off, but when you have the CCP, that's not really how they're thinking of it, and so that's why I would defend tariffs on those grounds that maybe it's not the best thing in the moment for the economy, but I think in the long run there's an economic argument for it.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about, silicon chips and the kind of cutting edge technology, some of these controls maybe make sense. Like with trading soybeans with China, is that going to like make them more of a global power or stop them from being a global power? Yeah, I don't think so. And so it depends on what we're talking about. But Trump he's just generally hostile to trade, and it's changed the political culture. Like the TPP, Obama tried to sign it, and then basically Hillary had to come out against it at the end because she was facing pressure from Sanders. Trump just sort of changed the kind of political culture away from wanting to trade with other countries, completely. And so, yeah, I mean, he says he wants 10% tariffs across the board. Josh Barrow has an article. I read this after I wrote my piece on voting for Trump, that, actually the executive has a lot of power over this. He might actually be able to get what he wants out of this. So no, I think it's generally, rational to be concerned about this. Yeah, I mean, I don't like to talk much about like who to vote for, because I think that like there are just very bad ideas on the right and left, and each of these things is a coalition, and each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. So I think a lot of right-wing people just spend so much time justifying voting for Trump or conservatism or whatever, that they sort of lose sight of like what the point of any of this is, right? And I want a better version of Democrats. I want a better version of Republicans. Somebody's going to win the election. Someone's going to have political power. Maybe it's this party or maybe it's not. But I just try to make sort of everyone smarter and more in line with my values, and that's where I like to focus on. I think that's where most intellectuals should focus on. I think we'd all be better off if we were like that.
I think the strongest argument for Trump in that vein comes actually on reproductive rights. And I've been very surprised. The Truth Social post, I didn't believe it when he said, I'll be very good for women's reproductive rights. And I was like, I don't believe you. You say all kinds of crazy stuff all the time. So probably the next post will be, pranked you, actually I'll be the most pro-life candidate of all time.
No, no, he won't. He's been consistent during this campaign that he's he's throwing the pro-lifers under the bus.
Yeah, no, and I genuinely am excited about that for the reasons that you stated. That I don't want to just say, oh, well, the Democrats are better and therefore never vote Republican. It's like, don't you want to reward the candidate who's going to break the back of the pro-life movement? And so even if I disagree with on foreign policy things in Ukraine, or, I think there's a lot of issues that you've already spoken to, I think it's like, what would the effect of Trump losing be? People, you've got like Nick Fuentes saying, oh, well, that was me. I'm taking credit for that. We destroyed Trump. See, you shouldn't have upset the base. But if he wins, I mean, those people basically have to go home. Like, they have to vote for, I don't know, RFK. They have to write in RFK. I mean, he's not even anti-abortion. So it's like, there's the Green Party, there's Libertarians, Republicans, Democrats. Like, you can't even vote third party, or you're going to write in Nick Fuentes. Like, come on, this is really devastating to them. And I think that's a historic shift. And the example I would use to prove my point is gay marriage. In 2014, you still had the Santorums and the Huckabees, and they were like, I believe a marriage is a man and a woman. And Trump came along and he just destroyed those people. And he sent out, I mean, not personally, but Charlie Kirk, a close ally, TPS USA, close donors, they sent him out with Rob Smith to say, look, I'm a gay black veteran. I'm a conservative. I'm a Trump supporter. This is the face of the Trump movement. You had Lady MAGA. You had more kind of subtle people than Lady MAGA. Dave Rubin, for example, he's like, I'm a gay man, and you know what? I agree more with Trump. So the Trump effect in its ability to smash cultural conservatism has a lot of negative effects in the sense that it allows for the Gribble voters to have a field day and go crazy with QAnon. But then it also seems to have this effect where it just puts these issues to rest. It puts them to bed. Gay marriage is no longer a question in American society. And so I'm wondering if Trump could do that to abortion. I think it's more difficult, but down the road, we might look back at 2024 and a Trump victory and say that was the moment that pro-life died. And I think that's actually a pretty good case. Even though Kamala would be immediately better on the issue, I think in the long term, actually, the net effect of Trump would be more abortion overall, which I guess I support.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, that's a good analogy to gay marriage. I think the vibes are shifting within the Republican Party, and they're shifting because of political realities, and also shifting because of Trump himself. And it's sort of a cult of personality. And they take their marching orders from Trump. And I was surprised to see sort of the knives come out for the pro-lifers on Twitter. This woman Leila Rose, or whatever her name is getting attacked sort of viciously by these other MAGA influencers. Yeah, I mean, will Trump, whether he wins or loses, matter for that? I don't know. Like, I think that if you'd still take the judges that Kamala's going to appoint just on reproductive health issues, I mean, look, you'll get Roe again. If the Democrats take the Supreme Court, there could be an accident which takes out, a few Supreme Court justices, and Kamala could appoint their replacements. If she won 2 terms, she could significantly change the court. And so, yeah, it's I think that what Trump's, it's good what Trump is doing and saying. Whether he wins or loses or not, I don't know. I think he's still going to control the party if he loses. I just think it's a cult of personality. It's still there. He's still going to be able to talk and tweet and all this other stuff, and nobody can really dislodge him. It's just that the party is sort of a mess under him. It's a hollow shell because everybody has just sort of twisted their entire worldview or their entire psychology to match up with Trump's personal grievances and like emotional instability. And so they all become about, the left is stealing elections, or they're all like, they've all just accepted his frame that the deep state is bad. Just like the way he's like sort of twisted the conservative movement. Part of it is because there's like, a lot of grifters in conservatism. That's why they're able to adjust. So, a lot of people who were with George W. Bush and the terror warriors and all that are now big MAGA people, just because, it's sort of, there's this natural progression for them to sort of follow where the voters are. And whoever happens to be the leader of the party. But yeah, I mean, whether that like matters, whether Trump wins or loses, I don't know. I don't think he's discredited. I don't think he goes away if he loses anyway. I think it's baked in that he's still going to be a major figure.
What I like about Trump is that he is a guaranteed one-term president. I don't think that he's going to be. He's like, what is he, 79? So he's going to be 83. I mean, he's going to be older than Bernie Sanders, older than Joe Biden. I don't think he's going to go for a third term. I know maybe he would like to go for a third term, but I don't think he has the capacity to do that. And so by voting for Trump, you are guaranteeing there will be no Republican incumbent in 2028. And I think that in certain ways, the fact that Trump is so crazy and he turns people off, it's putting pressure on the Democrat Party to say like, and this is the Reagan calculation back in 1980, where Carter, or the left, it wasn't Carter himself necessarily, but the left in general was saying, well, Reagan's crazy, he wants a nuclear war, he's a crazy right-winger. All Reagan had to do was just act normal. He just had to say, I'm just a normal guy, I'm a normal American, and he had a landslide. So I think the Democrats are kind of in that same mindset where they're like, Trump is so crazy, if we just act normal, we'll win. And I think that's a good sort of pressure on them for pragmatic reasons. If you go back to 2012, I don't think there was any mention of the word transgender. I don't think showed up in the Democrat platform or in the primaries or anything. That really, came to a head 2016 to 2020. And now I think there's a different calculus. And that's more effective for me in terms of utilitarian getting actual policies passed. Like on both sides, I think like, who is playing in women's sports and who is going in what bathroom. I mean, that doesn't have a huge economic or social impact on our country and our stability. It's kind of a clown show. I mean, literally 100 years ago, people took their kids to see the bearded lady. Like, people like weird stuff. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The idea when Chaya Raichik goes out there and she says, we have to stop the drag queen story. How are you going to stop it? You're going to ban people from dressing a certain way? You're going to steal children from their parents? Because it's not like the parents are bringing them there. So take it up with the parents. This isn't a government issue. You don't legislate your way. You don't, vote for Trump to stop drag queen story. What is he going to do? He's going to kidnap the kids, or he's going to execute the parent? What is the policy here that you're advocating for? So that pure grievance stuff, the corollary on the left, of course, is I forget what the Hispanic candidate's name was, but in 2020 went up there and said, we have to protect the rights of trans women's and their pregnancies and so on. And it's like, the less we can talk about that, the more we can talk about substantial policy issues. And I think that's where Democrats win. And you see that in how these supposedly red states are voting on abortion. They actually, the pro-choice Republican is a real thing. And Trump, the funny thing is, like, Roe v. Wade, again, has it decreased abortions in the moment? Yes. But over the long term, it's just showed this huge lie, which is that every Republican voter is pro-life. That's just not true. So I don't know if it probably wasn't his intention to do that, wasn't the judge's intentions, but like revealing that, I think, is a huge cultural shift. And as much as there is policy, I think also just normalizing that choice, because I think there's a lot of women who would choose to have an abortion who don't choose to have it because they feel like, well, I'm a Republican and I'm a conservative and we don't do that. We have to be pro-life. And I think, having that be an issue that people can vote on individually as a ballot measure or something, I think actually that's going to create a cultural shift as well, which is also good. So they're kind of two separate interconnected issues. But yeah, it's complicated. You can't really.
You said there's fewer abortions because of Dobbs. The analysis isn't very comprehensive, but there are some analysis that suggests number of abortions went up. I don't know, people went to other states, or like it sort of became sort of normalized to have an abortion because public opinion became more pro-choice. So a lot of people did. Yeah, I mean, the cultural grievance is not a good way to vote. Yeah, trannies is not a good way to vote. I mean, it has some, like, there's policies like, oh, whether Tim Walz put tampons in the boys' bathroom, is that going to determine your vote in the presidential election? I hope not. Maybe for some people it does, but it really shouldn't.
It's a strong point for the Gribbles. Although, on some point, I feel like there's a cargo cult in the grifting class where they're kind of grasping at straws and they're imagining. Basically, they're trying to strum up safe controversy. They don't want to say things that are so wild and crazy that gets them in trouble, but they do want to pretend to be wild and crazy. And so pointing out, like, tampon Tim, like, saying that is, much safer than a lot of the QAnon stuff, which is like, they're pedophiles and we need to execute them, and Hillary Clinton's going to jail and they're lizard people. So they're trying to appeal to those emotions, but doing it in a safe way. It's obviously very disingenuous. I don't think most people care, to be honest, but that's the attempt there. So I guess there's a I don't know. I found your argument very persuasive about RFK and potentially being the 2028 nominee. And I'm very interested in, I guess I've sort of always felt that way of, if everybody is focused on the current election, we need to look ahead 4 years and we need to ask ourselves about the next election, because the market is super saturated. So there's too many hot takes. Everything that has been said has already been said. There's no point. We should really be focusing on 2028. And it is an interesting question looking forward. Is he going to make a play? And then who is the alternative? When I look at, and again on this abortion issue, when I heard DeSantis or I heard Haley, I heard Tim Scott, they were all like, yeah, we want some kind of national federal abortion ban. And Trump always has to be that exception. He always has to surprise people and go against the grain on that one. So I kind of wonder, 2028, are the Republicans going to try to reverse the position and go back to the DeSantis, Haley, Tim Scott thing? I don't know what Vivek Ramaswamy thinks. I think Vivek was basically just like a Trump surrogate. I don't know at this point. I don't think he had any intention other than to be like, I have been sent by my master Trump to inform you that you're all globalist shills or something. So I don't think when Trump goes away, I don't think he has any viability. I think he was just there as almost like a protest vote on the stage. But yeah, the rest of them, they're all ostensibly pro-life. Are they capable of adjusting that position to follow the trends as they're continuing? Or are they going to try to revert to that position? I'm not sure. I think on a number of geopolitical issues, this has always been an issue where, like, national Republican candidates, with the exception, I guess, of DeSantis, have always said, like, yeah, we stand with our allies. We stand with Israel. We stand with Ukraine. We stand with Taiwan. We're not pulling out of NATO. We're not doing that crazy stuff. So how much, I think you're suggesting that there's going to be a return to normal among Republicans broadly, but then at the same time, there could also be this kind of wild card, like there's going to be a void, there's going to be a vacuum of craziness. The Gribble voters are going to be demanding and shouting, we want the crazy. And then someone like Tulsi and RFK and these sort of people are going to step into the void and say, I am your voice. I am the king of the Gribbles. So these are kind of
so much of it is going to be, so much of it is going to be charisma. Like, I think Haley was just more likable than DeSantis. I don't know if she actually came out for a national abortion ban. I'm not sure if that's right. I know that Tim Scott did, and I think DeSantis probably did too. DeSantis tried to get to the right of Trump on abortion. So yeah, there's going to be this contingency of like people who just are into conspiracy theories and cults of personality. They could go for someone like RFK or Tulsi Gabbard. They've shown they don't care about ideology at all, and these people can be brought into the party. I mean, they'll get nice coverage on Tucker and Rogan, and these are just the two. These are the two biggest podcasts in the country, depending on which day you look. And so, Yeah, I think this is potential. And you're going to have like the conservative intelligentsia candidate. That's maybe DeSantis again. You'll probably have Haley. I don't know why she wouldn't just run again. And then you'll have other figures potentially coming out. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah, you're going to have Trump. I mean, Trump. If Trump loses, Trump could be the nominee in 2028. If Trump is not there, he's in jail. Or if he's in jail, I think he'll be the nominee. If he's can't run again because he won, or if he's I don't know, his health won't allow it or whatever. Yeah, it's going to be sort of the normie Republicans. It'll be the anti-woke, the guy who all the conservative intellectuals, the Claremont people are in love with. And then there's going to be this sort of faction of crazies. And it's a powerful force. That's what I say. The Gribbles. I mean, like you take Tucker's show, you take Rogan's show, you take like Tim Pool, you take like even this stuff is like seeped into like Fox News and like how they cover RFK. It's powerful. There are a lot of crazy conspiracy theorists out there. Republican base has always been crazy. Now they're consolidating in one place, and that's potentially a political force.
I want to go back a little bit historically. There's an author, Kevin Phillips. He popularized the term Southern strategy. He wrote a book in 2006 called American Theocracy. And he basically left the Republican Party because of the trend that you're describing, which he didn't have QAnon to refer to as like the crazy Republican thing. And so he was more just attacking the moral majority, evangelical Christians, the abortion issue, all of these things they were, I mean, we forget now, but, there was a satanic panic. There was, all kinds of attempts to legislate, we have to, I mean, it was the same stuff, right? They were talking about underground tunnels and child abuse. So that's why he left the party. He joined the Democrats. He said, these are sensible people. I can work with them. And it was that kind of shift, I think, that we recognize someone like Bill Clinton is basically fiscally responsible. And so it's people like Kevin Phillips who were making that shift, who were saying, you know what, Reagan, crazy cult of personality, senile, going way too far on the evangelical side. We need to figure out what we can do with the Democrats. So I think this problem precedes Trump, and I think even you can look at a guy like George Bush, who now we listen to a George Bush speech and we're like, a philosopher. He's like an intellectual, because the contrast to Trump is so great. But at the same time, there was that energy there of a hardcore appeal to evangelicals, the way that he phrased the global war on terror as like this spiritual battle between light and darkness, rather than, kind of a logical, hey, we have a commitment to our allies or something. So there was a lot there that I think came before Trump. And as much as we'd like to blame Trump, he's like Hitler. You stare into his eyes and they're so beautiful. He seduces the nation. But I put a little more blame on the nation. I say, actually, the nation has been getting stupider and dumber and idiocracy. And you can see it in Bush, and you can even see it in Reagan. Kevin Phillips was disgusted by it, and he left the party. So yeah, I would be put a little less blame on Trump and a little more blame just on the average voter in that respect.
I agree with that. I mean, I would put it Bush than more on Bush than Reagan. I don't buy that as far as Reagan. I think his policies, deregulation and all that. I think that those were good policies. Even on the Cold War, I think he was vindicated ultimately. But yeah, I mean, stuff has been, Go Back, John Birch Society, Pat Buchanan, the paranoid, Richard Hofstadter, and about the paranoid streak of the American voter. Yeah, this stuff has always been there. I think what happened was basically social media. I mean, I think that these are two sides of the same coin, like Trumpism and populism on the right of the Great Awakening. I think they're both catalyzed by communications technology. Right. And, and I think that this Twitter came along, Facebook, like these people are on Truth Social, they're in different places, they're on 4chan. And yeah, they're able to sort of congregate and, become crazier and crazier. You have podcasts, people who like nobody would, who would listen to Brett Weinstein if he, if you had a society where you only had institutions and people could only speak through institutions. And so you're right. I think it's always been there in our society. What is it? What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about religious fundamentalism, or are we talking about just like general craziness, which overlaps with the religious fundamentalism, but it's not the same thing. Sometimes antagonistic to it, as we see with Trump's positioning on abortion. Yeah, but whatever whatever this thing is, this general craziness, it's been there, and it's just these people have gotten more power. We've gotten dumber. I mean, you used to have blogs. You still have blogs. You still have Substacks, obviously, but like that was like the social media of its day, like in the early 2000s. But those were smart, right? It was like Andrew Sullivan and like Peter Beinart, and like, you'd have to write articles, and the people who wanted to be into politics would have to like read articles, and even if they weren't the most brilliant articles or whatever, they were still something. And so it wasn't like social media where people just share these stupid fake memes, or just show like giga chads, or like these pictures of women in dresses like holding babies in like a field, right? It's just like so stupid. It's just like, I like this thing that looks beautiful, or like I have this conspiracy theory or whatever. And that's social media taking over our politics. And I don't know, I hope people get sick of politics. I hope maybe like it just like stops being exciting to people. Like they go through cycles. I think when Elon Musk took over Twitter, like there was this period where like it was much worse. Like everything was like anti-Semitism. There was like this obsession with surrogacy and all this other stuff, like all these sort of stupid right-wing things, but they cycled like a few times. And then it's like, I don't know, like people just get bored with it eventually. Like they just move on. And like maybe like, how long can you shit post on social media, right? You're doing this for 3 years. How many things can you talk about? I hate gay people. Oh, black crime. Oh, immigration. Like, you can only talk about this stuff so much. It stops being new. And hopefully like they all just get into something else, and, our politics get smarter.
Oh gosh, I wish that was true. I kind of want to go a little bit back even before the John Birch Society and early 20th century politics with Father Coughlin and Charles Lindbergh, and these people who basically came out of World War One feeling that the government was I mean, all of these narratives about globalism and the cabal of elites, and they're trying to get us in a war. I mean, that's where a lot of those ideas, and of course anti-Semitism, that's where a lot of those ideas germinated. And FDR basically banned those people from the airwaves. I mean, he totally took them out of commission. But they didn't, like, the spirit of it didn't die. And of course, as you said, it resurrected with John Birch. And then George Wallace went running with that spirit and had this huge third party. It wasn't a victory, but
yeah, I think these are different. I think these are different things, though. I mean, I think that like going back to Charles Lindbergh and like Father Coughlin and the opposition to the New Deal and American entry in World War II, that's one thing. I mean, segregation was like it was just a regional it was a regional kind of, not a civil war because it wasn't a civil war, but like a kind of just a division between regions, between elites on the East Coast and most of the rest of the country, and people in the South who had a different social system. Now, this is not like MAGA, where it's like everyone is just sort of sitting on their couch or sitting in front of their phone and like becoming obsessed with like QAnon and like all these things that aren't even logical. I mean, the segregationists had policy goals and that they had something they wanted to maintain. The QAnon and this sort of the weird MAGA stuff is just sort of celebrity focused and not even focused on issues. It's just like a cult of personality. So these are all sort of different things. Like, yeah, people are often paranoid and anti-elite, but like, I don't know, the connection between these things doesn't seem clear to me.
Well, so Kevin Phillips would agree with you, and I do agree with you that the connection between these things is a form of perversion. That his original point was we have policy goals. We want to make certain things happen. When he supported Nixon, obviously it wasn't about segregation, but it was about we got to have law and order. We got to be tough on crime. All of these. We have low taxes, right? So it was sensible. It was measured. I mean, it did have real policy goals, as opposed to where we are now, where it's like Jeffrey Epstein has an island, and therefore we got to vote against the Democrats because somehow those two things are connected. So what I'm kind of tracing here is that how you did have originally a high human capital, kind of intelligent, policy-driven, sane group of people who were actually not extremely religious. I mean, people don't know this, but the Klan was anti-Catholic because they thought they were too superstitious, and they actually were in favor of prohibition, which was one of the greatest. I mean, I don't know, a lot of people like alcohol, but I'm just saying in terms of deaths, and not just direct deaths, but how many people kill someone because they got drunk, or they drive drunk and kill somebody, or crimes of passion or whatever. And also people commit suicide because they get drunk, they get sad, and then they make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So prohibition was actually, I know libertarians don't like that, but it was very effective at decreasing deaths and harm. So a lot of those progressive policies were tied in with these segregationists. And they were not QAnon extremists, but I think that when you had Brown v. Board and these other rulings, it created a psychological stress. Like you said, it wasn't a literal civil war, but it created this cultural stress where the country changed so much so fast in that civil rights transition from a country where people had freedom of association to a country where, legally they didn't. I think that made people crazy. I think prior to civil rights, people were to say, look, I'm a segregationist, you're not. We can have a conversation about that. We have policy. And then after that, those rulings came down. It was a series of laws and rulings. But once that process happened, people started going crazy, and they started going for John Birch. And so what was originally maybe immoral, we repudiate segregation, but it was sensible, it was logical, it was intelligent. Because of the culture war that happened, it metastasized and morphed and became something very ugly and crazy, and that's what we have today. So that's the connection I draw, not equating them, but actually saying there was a kind of tragic, like in Lord of the Rings, where the elves become the Uruk-hai through this torturous process by Saruman. That's kind of what I'm suggesting here.
Yeah, I agree with you. The origins of woke, I talk about this actually. I make sort of almost the exact same point that basically civil rights law did a lot of this. And it's not that it's like, yeah, like the South becomes sort of hostile to Democrats and elites based on what happens during the civil rights era. That can morph into, oh, we love this guy Trump, and that could even morph into like, oh, now we don't care about abortion anymore. Now we're accepting based black guys or whatever. It just created this division of like region, like rural versus urban, regional, class-based kind of resentments. And that can take many different forms. That could be the Tea Party, that could be Trumpism. Now it's sort of becoming, I think, conspiracy theories and gribbleism. And so, yeah, you're right. That's sort of, I think nobody would, it's hard to deny that, like, the mid 1960s is sort of when things broke, and everything since then has been sort of recognizable. Like, we understand like who are the descendants of like the pro civil rights side. Conservatives try to like confuse things. Oh, Democrats were the segregationists and we were the anti-segregationists. But like, come on, like all those people over the civil rights issue became Republicans, and they started, voting for Wallace and then Reagan. And so, yeah, I think this is a pretty clear breaking point in American history.
Yeah, and this is why I'm very cautious to just say we should break it in the opposite direction, because I think that anytime, like, essentially what I'm saying is civil rights broke the American civil religion. That was a process that FDR began with his, packing the court and all of those things, made people very upset. But he still was winning elections, but, civil rights wasn't won in an election. And so up until that point, the narrative of America's we're a republic, we're representative democracy, people vote for things, rule the people, you get what you vote for. And all of a sudden that was broken. And some people were cool with that because they agreed with the morality of the issue. And other people were not. And they started to, again, this subterranean aspect of American culture was metastasizing and getting perverse. But on the surface, like, we've stabilized. Like, nobody supports segregation anymore, at least not explicitly in terms of elections. Like, it doesn't matter. It's a dead issue in the same way that gay marriage is basically a dead issue, and maybe abortion will become a dead issue. But as these issues die, there's kind of these ghosts that haunt and these curses that are whispered and echo into the future. And so, like you said, actually opposition to segregation has now turned into supporting this weird, he's a mixed race person. He's not even black, but he's like this former basketball player in Minnesota. I don't know that Royce. I don't know.
Yeah, Royce White. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what an incredible person to say that there is a progression from segregationism to Royce White. I mean, that blows the mind. But again, I think if you follow what's going on here, you see, like, actually, this is like we are still dealing with civil rights in Royce White. Like in this really convoluted way, this is a consequence of civil rights. And so my argument is that then saying, okay, well, we'll just get rid of civil rights and that'll be better. It's like, well, maybe, but you also have to consider there's going to be a lot of opposition to that at an elite level and problems with that. And so, at least understanding, I respect people, you have an ideal society, you're libertarian, you want civil liberties, you want freedom of association. I respect the position, but people who say, well, oh, it's easy. We just, it's like turning off and on a light switch and then everything will be fixed. It's like civil religion is important. It affects people in crazy way. People are crazy and you have to account for that, I guess is my argument.
Yeah, I don't think you getting rid of, so a lot of the expansions of civil rights law will be something that necessary. I don't think it's even that radical, because I think it's bigger than that now. It's not about the current state of the law. It's not because like the law says you have to have affirmative action in like government contracting, or you have to have a disparate impact standard in judging discrimination. I don't think that's like at the core now of like what we're fighting about. Right. So, when I advocate getting rid of the excesses of civil rights law, I don't see it as like that radical of a step. Like, I don't think the Supreme Court ruling in the Harvard affirmative action case like overturned the American civil religion or anything like that. I mean, going back and saying, it's got to be even bigger than going back to like saying, oh, the Civil Rights Act was bad, or like criticizing Martin Luther King or whatever. Like, you have to have like an alternative to that of like what American history is. Like, we don't even like have it anymore. And I think because like it actually is like white supremacy. I mean, I think that like you wrote this, and I think it's actually correct that it was like whites, took over this continent. I mean, all our mid 20th, it was like Enlightenment too. It was like we're advancing human civilization. Of course, that's America. But it was very tied in to the identity of the people who did it. And then, and so like, criticizing Martin Luther King or whatever is not going to sort of get you back to that. You could say, oh, he was a communist, or he had bad policy ideas, or was a philanderer, or whatever. That, okay, fine. But that's not going to, that's not going to fundamentally bring back what was lost, right? And people who criticize Martin King will say, oh no, I love the good Black people who, Thomas Sowell should be our hero instead of Martin Luther King, or whatever. And so you haven't really challenged much of anything. So yeah, I think it's so, the old sort of American vision, like this thing that like white nationalists want to bring back, is like so dead. Like, we don't even have to worry about it in the real world. But the echoes of it are still there. But it's echoes of it, but it's really has accommodated itself to the new realities.
Yeah, an interesting point, I guess I would say. I mean, I agree with you that white supremacy is dead in a sense, but again, it hasn't lost its centrality to our culture. It's just inverted. Yeah. And so instead of elites in our country like Woodrow Wilson watching Birth of a Nation and being like, this is who we are, this is what America is, and this is what we embrace, civil rights, there was this inversion where the centrality of white supremacy didn't lose its power. It just became negative instead of positive. And so ultimately, white supremacy is still the moral center of our society, just in a negative way rather than a positive way. Yeah. The problem with that is that you want to have a positive vision of your society. You don't just want it to be resentful, vengeful, oh, we have to get back at these white supremacists who, like you said, are not a political force in themselves anymore. Culturally, nobody opposes interracial marriage. I mean, this is not a controversial thing. But yeah, that inversion process means that actually we didn't replace a positive civil religion with another positive civil religion. We kind of replaced it with a negative one. And we're still struggling with that. And so, like you said, when conservatives come along and say, well, we'll just deconstruct Martin Luther King and everything will be fine. It's like, no, we don't want to replace a negative civil religion with another negative civil religion. We want to replace it with a positive one. So let's start, thinking positively in that direction. And for me, if we want to bring everything together, we have to recognize what you referenced, those Enlightenment values of progress, technology, the frontiersmen, and ask ourselves, what is the frontier of today? And to me, that's a technological frontier. And I think that has to be, at the center of our new civil religion. How you convince the man on the street of that, I don't think is extremely relevant. I think you just mobilize elites in that direction, and then the people will follow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kamala campaign and sort of what's going on with sort of the post wokeness. I mean, that would go too far to call it sort of post wokeness Democratic Party, but at least post 2022 or post 2020. Yeah, there is this sort of idea like the white dudes for Harris. There is this idea that sort of, okay, we're sort of, Obama was like supposedly post-racial. And so we did have this moment where like white supremacy wasn't that central. It was like on its way out. And we're not even back to Obama's 2008 in this Kamala Harris campaign, but you can start to see sort of what it looks like. What the sort of the next evolution in this sort of liberal ideal of America is going to be. And I think that once like every Democratic ticket for the next like 20 years has a woman or a minority or both, it's like the idea that white supremacy is central becomes sort of less and less. Even like the way they attack Republicans doesn't focus so much on white supremacy as it did, like as much as it did in 2016. It's more focused on, look, these people are anti-democratic, or like they're low human capital, even though the Democrats don't put it like that. It's like these are irresponsible, crazy people, and that messaging has like sort of become more prominent than their racist stuff. I mean, Kamala says we should have a border wall, and they act like they're going to get tough on immigration. So even that, like the sort of white supremacy is like central. That was like the central to Democratic messaging from like 2015 to 2020, 21. Where maybe, and this stuff ebbs and flows anyway. So it's just like a cycle. So like, whatever, maybe it's not that permanent of a shift. But we'll see, we'll see in the coming years. It seems like we are moving towards like what the liberal vision would be. It's not that positive. It's like sort of like Tim Walz. It's like very sort of small-minded, like, oh, we're gonna all help each other out, and you're gonna mind your own business and help your neighbors, and be polite to everybody. It's sort of like this Minnesota nice kind of small-mindedness. But yeah, I mean, I think something like that is probably like right, but it has to be yoked to something bigger and more idealistic, and that's like the vision. That's like that should be the goal of people on the left, people on the right, everyone trying to sort of understand what comes next.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Obama had this vision of a post racial America that was idealistic, that was exciting in its promise. And it was not only unable to fulfill that promise, but went in the exact opposite direction. Biden then came along as this old white guy and said, "Okay, I'm not opposed to Obama. We still want to have a post-racial America, but there's still a place for old white men in that, and we're going to bring the country together." So there was still like an idealism in. I mean, obviously, conservatives will hate if you say that, but there was a kind of idealistic appeal of bringing the country together. And I didn't view him as a small-minded guy in the way that you're identifying Tim Walz as, like, you got to help your neighbor. If your neighbor needs a pound of sugar, you go over to his house and you give him a pound of sugar. And it's like, that's not really a vision for the country. You're not really addressing these big
Well,
systemic
Biden's
issues.
obsession with foreign policy, the NATO stuff, this was central to what Biden believed. So you're right. There is that. And I think Ukraine really brought that out. It's interesting that it didn't last. Like even Democrats, like they like Ukraine now, they still want to support it, but it's not like one of the main issues they talk about or anything, in part because public opinion doesn't care. And Republicans find it very easy to sort of demagogue on this issue. But you're right. I think that's part of the liberal vision too, though. They've incorporated, even if it's not specifically about Ukraine, it's like, how dare this man insult our allies and like jeopardize the rules-based international order. You listen to Kamala's speech during the DNC. That was a big part of it. That's still a big part of their pitch.
Yeah, I mean, that concept of being, and I think this is going back to Reagan, maybe even before Reagan, but the idea that the president is not just the president of the United States, this is the leader of the free world. Like that is, again, conservatives hate that, but that is an idealistic vision. Like, we do rule the world, and we are making it a better place. We are the shining city on the hill. We care about Ukraine. We care about Taiwan. We care about Israel. We care about what's going on in these other countries. We want to make them better. We are willing to die, actually, for the cause of making other countries better. I mean, that is something that, like as you said, it's hard for Democrats to state that boldly because there's so much sniping from Republicans and there's so much corrosion and cynicism like, oh, you just want us to fight another corporate war, and all wars are bad, and it's all the Rothschilds and stuff like that. So it's becoming harder and harder to mobilize American men, especially. I mean, this is just an issue for the military recruitment. They are saying we don't have enough guys who want to sign up. Now, part of that is because mental illness is on the rise, obesity is on the rise, stupidity is probably on the rise. Like, a lot of these people are just not qualified anymore. But a lot of people who are qualified, who are young guys, they're athletic, they have some vague sort of right-wing sentiment or something. They should want to join the military, but they're disenchanted with that. So I think there has to be some kind of balance where, you have an idealism. And Joe Biden really tried his best at that. Unfortunately, he's too old. I think if he was 20 years younger, I mean, we wouldn't even really be having this discussion. I mean, I think he is a good politician. That's why he lasted so long. And unfortunately, it really is just it's a tragic fact. People get old and they're not as effective anymore. But yeah, asking, can Kamala position herself as, I am the leader of the free world, and I am going to provide that idealistic vision, versus what the Tim Waltz is providing, which is that, we're just hokey honky tonk. I don't like spice on my tacos, and you do, and that's okay. And we can all agree to disagree. It's like, okay. I mean,
yeah, Tim Walz is a remarkably, small-minded kind of unidealistic politician. Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe that's what people want. I don't know. Are people craving idealism? Maybe they're just craving, I don't know. After the Trump and Biden, seeing, like, I think just people were so pessimistic that might actually meet the moment. But yeah, maybe that's fine. I mean, maybe that's fine. Maybe just Tim Walzism versus, like, I don't know, Brian Kemp or something, or whatever, some other Republican, just a normal white guy, and they're just fighting over the budget. Maybe that's like the best we can hope for. I mean, I'm not against that. I mean, people can go find meaning from somewhere else. They can form families and stuff. They don't have to get it from partisan politics. We're probably too big and too divided at this point for that. If we want to do great things, maybe. But, like, I don't know. It's like, I think like you could just sort of think about sort of aligning incentives to do those great things. Like, do we do it because we've changed our value system? I think that's a longer term goal, not necessarily going to come through partisan politics.
Yeah, I guess where I would disagree is that we have had a significant decline in religion, and so in a very highly religious society, it is capable. You do have the ability to tell people, like, stop caring about politics. Just go to church. Like, find meaning in God. Like, go listen to your pastor. If you have a spiritual problem, go to church. We're talking about the budget. This is for the adults. If you're not interested in that, we don't have time for crazy conspiracy theories. But I think that as religion declines, even if you're an atheist, you have to admit that the desire for grand narratives doesn't just go away. People are going to seek those out. It's like pornography. It's like people have a sex drive. If they're not having sex, they're going to find it in some weird way online. And it's the same thing with politics. Like, if people, their religious or spiritual or whatever psychological need underlies that desire to be part of a grand narrative, where Jesus is saving the world, like, people need that. And if they can't find it in church because of this decline in religiousness, they're going to find it in these weird political cults. And that's going to have these disastrous effects on our politics. So I'm not a Christian. I'm not saying we should go back to church. But I am saying that, unfortunately, I think this is just an inevitable feature. And again, whether that's RFK or whether that's, something, both parties kind of polarizing. I guess I'm a little more cynical about the idea that the woke is decreasing. I think maybe there's a little bit of a pause. I think Kamala is just a very sensible person, and so she's doing her best. And I think Trump, in a weird way, is also kind of softening some of the Republican stuff. But it's a mixed bag, and there's bad trends on both sides.
Yeah, maybe you're right on people needing that kind of vision, and maybe maybe that implies that the reason Obama was just thinking too small. I mean, what was Obama's message? We're going to get beyond racism, and Red America and Blue America are going to go, play Little League together and be friends. And that's not a lot. I mean, that's really end of history stuff. It's getting past racism, but beyond that, there's nothing there. And maybe that's why sort of he inspires the Tea Party. Maybe people were just, like after Obama comes the Great Awakening, and comes the Tea Party, and like sort of Republicans going crazy. And so yeah, maybe Tim Walzism, maybe it wins an election. Maybe it doesn't damper the need for something higher. Yeah, you might be right about that.
Yeah, I mean it's a sad fact that I would love it if we could have King Tim Waltz or even King Obama, or say just put him in for eternally for life president or something, because a lot of things would just function better. But at the same time, you're right to say that putting that kind of hokey, I'm just hey, listen, folks, these are our values. Okay, yeah, that actually makes people angry. That, and again, it's gribbles, it's crazy people, but you are kind of instigating them by creating this hollow, lame, mediocre vision for the country, not being bold, not being controversial, not being positive. Like you said, we're going to defeat racism. Okay, that's a double negative. Actually, double negatives, like on a deep level, are not super attractive to people. People want a positive. We're going to do this. We're going to have this new thing. I totally disagree with Trump trying to take federal land and make new cities. Like, I'm an environmentalist. I'm against that. But things like that, in a sense, or we're going to colonize Mars, or like visions like that, I think are much actually safer in the long run than folks, our values, we're neighbors, blah blah blah.
Maybe, I mean, we will get there. The INB's on the left, and the building new cities on the right. Yeah, maybe we'll get there. I think that's. Yeah, I mean, there's two things you could be doing in public life. You could be like pushing for reasonable policies, and you could be pushing sort of for a vision. And the vision thing, it has to be a bipartisan thing. The vision thing cannot be, I'm just going to tell the right, or I'm just going to tell the left what they should think, and they're going to crush their opponents, because that's not going to work. That's going to inspire a backlash, and we're going to have a fragmented politics. And so, yeah, the vision thing, I think, maybe a project for the future. Maybe something me and you can be involved in some or small ways, can be to sort of point people in that direction.
Yeah, the one thing I would mention about the bipartisan nature of it is FDR. He actually was good to an extent about reaching across the aisle and cooperating with some Republicans. There was a hardcore that was against him, and he ultimately was a Democrat. And he was able to align a lot of really contradictory factions who individually totally disagreed with each other, and then somehow say, we're all Americans, we're coming together, and we're going to defeat Germany and Japan, and like really brought and he was able to actually use censorship in an effective way to kind of take care of the gribbles at the time. Father Coughlin was like screaming at the top of his lungs, about the Jews and stuff. So, I mean, he was not part of that sensible segregationist core that maybe Kevin Phillips was sympathetic to. So, FDR was able to deal with that effectively. And, Curtis Yarvin, I'm not a monarchist, but he did mention in your debate with him, he was like, we kind of need another FDR. We kind of need like a really strong president who's going to give us a vision and set things right. I wouldn't call that monarchy. I think, you can advocate for that within a Republican or Democratic framework. But, that's kind of an alternative to sort of a bipartisan vision coming together, is just one person becomes so effective at building coalitions that they totally steamroll the opposition, and they institute really powerful reforms and create that vision.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is hard. I mean, sort of techno-optimism, was a kind of, it's always been, but I think techno-optimism, it's more seen as some kind of this thing on the right that's come along recently. But like the early days of the internet, I think it was much more mainstream, where everyone was like, oh, Hillary Clinton would agree. Oh, the Arab Spring. Oh, there's going to be all this great stuff happening for tech. The problem is, like, all these visions, they always leave people behind, like, even if not economically, then like psychologically. So you look at like the EU. The EU is like a broad vision, and then like the Brexit, the people who are like old and like who don't even know how to use a computer end up voting against it, and end up taking the UK out of it, right? So it's like it's hard with a vast democracy, because there's just people who are just angry, and they don't like change, and they're scared, and like so many old people vote, and like they all have dementia now, and they're like they're watching Fox News every night, and someone is trying to take their life savings and to scare them. And so the question is, how do you do this without like, without inspiring that kind of backlash, which is like not going to lead to a competing idealism, but just sort of this, just sort of this, small-minded conservatism and reactionary blowback. I don't know.
Well, Macron in France, we'll see how he does in the future. But as far as his attempt to attack Social Security in France and the riots that resulted, I mean, that is the level of resistance that you
Yeah.
encounter when you try
And that
to
was young people writing. Writing. I was just thinking about older people voting, but you're right. Yeah, you do uh, get resistance. Yeah, I mean, France is interesting. I mean, it's like it still operates as a kind of cartel. The way they all came together against Le Pen's party, that was very interesting. That wouldn't happen in America. And so, yeah, it's sort of a vision, but at the same, it is a vision. It does require inspire a backlash. I don't know. Maybe but the it's not the case that Le Pen's voters are old. I mean, the Le Pen's voters are young, so they're going to be there for a while. And America, maybe we age out of it. Maybe all the bitter old people die in the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, and then this idea that like you're going to have like people worried about illegal immigration forever. Um, this is disproportionately old people. It's not going to necessarily be an issue, especially with changing demographics plus the aging out effect and people being upset about gays. I mean, in 20 years, homosexuality won't be controversial, and then what? Well, if we won't be fighting over that stuff, then, maybe it'll open up space for something more positive.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting demographic fact that a lot of these countries have different. So in Germany, the AfD is really popular with young people. In other countries, it's the old people who are voting or it's the young people. There's all kinds of different demographic trends. It's not all the same for all countries. But in America, there's an interesting facet that nobody talks about Gen X, because Gen X people kind of
Mhm.
dominate the journalist class and the media and the blogosphere and everything. And so everyone wants to, they like to blog about other people, but they don't like to be introspective. And so there's a real lack of Gen X commentary. And Gen X is actually the most crazy QAnon pro-Trump people. I mean, that's where he does best, is like the 35, like too old to be a
Yeah.
millennial, too young to be a boomer. Those are the people
Yeah.
who are most extreme in
It's
that
not a
respect.
big difference. I mean, it's not a big difference. Like a few points. I've seen some recent data. It's not like, yeah, it's like 5, 10 points. I mean, gender gaps are much bigger, racial gaps are much bigger. But you're right. It's sort of Gen X is like, I think they're like a very strong like IDW demographic. Like, they're not the way I put it once is they're not old enough to be like horrified by like Trump's like taking a wrecking ball to like all American norms. So like I think if you're very old, you're like, oh my goodness, the president said a swear word. But they don't care about that. But then they're too old to like be into like gender theory and like wokeness and all this other stuff, right? So it's like sort of the perfect demographic for Trump.
Well, they're the perfect age to be Dale Gribble. Like that age, like that. I exactly like the psychology of a person who's too old to be hip with the kids, but too young to be, a grandfather. Like that is peak political activity, anxiety, and again, it's not just the right wing, but I also think there is a like I have an article saying that Gen X caused wokeness, which is a bit tongue in cheek, but basically what I say is that wokeness is not a product of young people going on the internet and finding Tumblr or something. That's part of it, but actually a bigger cause is who their K through 12 teachers were. And the K through 12 teachers that produced wokeness were Gen X. So ultimately, that would be my argument regarding their influence and their attitudes on the right and the left. That they're responsible for a lot of bad things or weird things or crazy things, and they don't get enough blame. We always want to blame, oh, the Zoomers are crazy, the Boomers are crazy. Everybody's crazy. Gen X is crazy. So everyone deserves some blame here. I do want to check in with you regarding the time. I know we had said an hour initially, but you might have some gardening going on, so I want to make sure we don't abuse your time here.
Sure. I mean, it's been great talking to you. And what do I call you? What do I call you?
I go by Deep Left. I've been telling people they don't like the like two words as a name.
Okay, I call you DL.
DL is good.
All right, DL. I enjoyed this. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think that this went really well, and I hope we can talk again at some point.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. All right. Take care. Appreciate it. See you next time. All
So
right.
that
We're going to exit out of that. And as always, if you guys like it and you want to see more, you have to like, restack, comment, subscribe, tweet it out. I don't know. I don't know how you blow these things up, but obviously, I think this is going to get more views than most of the things I do because Richard has a big audience. But still, do all those things anyway. Show some love, show some support if you like it. I know there's going to be fans out there coming in, and I hope my audience likes it. I thought it was cool. I actually was surprised at how much we agreed and how much I thought we were going to have more contention and disagreement than we ended up having. For someone who is stereotyped as being very disagreeable and like a troll, I found him to be like totally open to compromise and considering other positions. So pleasantly surprised, but let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, that's all for now. Take care. Bye-bye.